Hello and welcome back. This is tutorial 5, the last tutorial for the Operation Crimson Stone box set. Okay, so there'll only be a few new skills covered for this tutorial. First off will be Parachutist. Now this is a special skill that reflects troopers deploying onto the field via parachute, fast rope, or whatever you choose to think it is. Now this is an entire order skill, and it takes an entire order spent. Now you don't have to choose to use it. You can, so this is basically around deployment. So you can choose to deploy this trooper not during the deployment phase. You can keep the miniature off table, and you can decide to bring it onto the table whenever it is your active turn. So while the trooper is off the table, it will not add their order to the order pool. However, the trooper will use its own order to deploy onto the table, and so it will expend that order as an entire order skill to get itself onto the table or the battlefield. So if you do choose to deploy the miniature with Parachutist, you cannot place the trooper in a prone state or in silhouette contact with an enemy or neutral models, nor silhouette contact in markers or tokens, or not in contact with any scenario objectives or scenery to get cover. So you have to deploy it in the open basically. However, you probably want to deploy it where there's very minimal line of sight. So you can deploy the trooper with Parachutist on the table. However, the surface of the table must be the same size or larger than the base of the miniature, and the base of the miniature has to be in contact with the edge of the table. Now, you cannot deploy within the enemy deployment zone, and you can deploy outside of your deployment zone. So basically in the midfield of the table. Now, once your miniature is deployed, you don't have to make any rolls or anything, you just place it down. However, the opponent gets to declare AROs against that miniature. Excuse me. The next one is Combat Jump. Similar to Parachutist, however, this allows you to actually land anywhere on the table and not on the table edge. So once again, you don't have to use this. You can deploy the trooper during your deployment phase in your deployment zone. If you choose to deploy it outside the deployment zone, you have to make a combat jump roll. And this allows you to deploy pretty much anywhere on the table. Same deal as before. The miniature doesn't provide an order to the combat group, and it uses its order to declare it's coming onto the battlefield. And you can't have it in base contact with anything, it must be in the open. But you can deploy it on any surface as long as the surface, so whether it be on top of a building or within a building, or whatever terrain is on the table, has to be larger than the miniature's base size. Okay, so you're not allowed to deploy inside buildings, which makes sense, or enclosed pieces of scenery. Same again, once you land on the table, your enemy makes their AROs, so you want to try and land it with as few AROs and with outside line of fire as possible. If your trooper has deployable weapons, they can deploy them as well when they pass their combat jump roll. So the roll you have to do is a physical, it goes off your physical attribute, and then if you get less or equal to or less than, you pass and the miniature can be deployed there. However, if you fail, then you have to deploy your miniature in your deployment zone, and it has to be touching a table edge in your deployment zone. So here's a bit of an example. So these yellow circles here are where parachutists can come in onto the table. So they can come anywhere in the midfield as long as their base is touching the table edge. And obviously they're not touching any scenery, and you want to make sure they have very few lines of fire to where they are. These ones here that are a bit more in the open, this is your combat jump ability. So you can land pretty much more in the field. However, you still want to make sure that you don't have any line of fire. And down here, this is where if you fail the roll to do your combat jump, you'll have to be deployed within your deployment zone, touching the table edge. Now this also can be used if you choose to deploy a parachutist on the battlefield. As long as it's touching the deployment edge, it doesn't really matter even if it's in deployment zone, because let's just say your opponent has an enemy model that is threatening your deployment zone. You may want to bring an extra miniature in to deal with that. Okay, game order and sequence. No changes from the previous tutorials. However, the only addition is the entire order skill, Parachutist and Combat Jump. Okay, so all the miniatures are used for this final scenario, and the miniature for Ariadna is the Paracommando, and you can see their attributes here. Pretty standard light infantry, and they have mimetism -3 and terrain 0G. And now for this tutorial, we decided to play with all these attributes for the miniatures. These are obviously N4 attributes, not code 1, so there's a lot more variety here, but we chose to play with all of this. It doesn't really matter because we didn't end up using it all anyway, so don't get too concerned about all these extra skills. And here's the weapon loadout for the Paracommando. They have a boarding shotgun, a pistol, and an armor-piercing close combat weapon. The damage of the boarding shotgun is 14. Its burst 2. It has armor-piercing ammunition and a saving roll against the armor attribute. And it's +6 for anything within 8 inches. Now, boarding shotguns have 2 modes. They have blast mode and hit mode. Hit mode will apply for these attributes here. Blast mode is using the small teardrop template, simulating the buckshot of this boarding shotgun. Nomads, again, all the miniatures will be used in this game. And the extra miniature for this is the Hellcats with their Parachutist and Combat Jump. So this one has 2 options. They do have the Parachutist skill, so you can bring it on as a Parachutist from the tab ledge, or I can choose to do Combat Jump. Now this +3 means that I get +3 to my physical skill, so that makes it 15 if I choose to bring it into the battlefield. And again, we decided to play with all the extra special skills. However, we didn't get to use them all. Ended up forgetting some anyway. And the same deal, the Hellcat is a medium infantry this time and has the same weapon loadout. Boarding shotgun, pistol, and armor-piercing close combat weapon. And you can see the attributes up top. Okay, the game. So the scenario itself has an objective, and the objective is to control the central module at the end of the game, which is this large center terrain piece here. Now it's hard to define what it means to control. Does it mean having at least 1 miniature and no enemy, or having more points for your faction than the opponent's faction? It wasn't quite clear, so we just decided to say that, okay, because it's a small battlefield, it's 150 point size terrain. It's 24 inches by 32, so it's very short. So we decided to play we decided to find the control as the faction with more trooper points on the objective, and that will be the winner. So you could have, let's just say 2 miniatures each from both sides, but the points value of those miniatures, when you total up together, whoever has the highest points will be the winner and control the central module. Okay, initiative roll, same as usual, whip 13. My opponent gets 19, I get a 7, so we both succeed. However, my opponent fails because it's higher than 13, so I win. And this time I choose deployment because I just want to see how my opponent is going to set up and try to gain control of the control room. And I want to try and counter that as much as possible. So my opponent keeps initiative and takes the first turn. I keep deployment and I choose to deploy second. And I'm deploying on the left side of the battlefield here. Why? Because the stairs here are deployed to my opponent and it'd be easier for them to move up. So I wanted to deploy in a way that would make it more fortuitous for myself. So because my opponent goes first, they deploy here. And as you can see, they decided to deploy the Parachutist, the Paracommando, during the deployment phase. So this is a legitimate use of the Parachutist skill, and the miniature is in board edge of the terrain, of the tabletop, or the mat, and it's not in cover. There's a gap there. And I choose to deploy my miniatures here, and I choose to keep my Hellcat off the table because I want to bring it in when I feel like it to help counter or create a new situation that I can take advantage of. So the benefit of my opponent deploying the Parachutist here is that now they have 3 miniatures in the midfield. I've only got 1. They've got their Para Commando, their infiltrating rocket, and the camo token. So they have the distinct advantage already. So here's just a photo of the deployment zone. As you can see, the parachutist is over there, standing on the table edge, without line of fire from my side of the field, but also not in cover with anything, not touching anything. Here's my deployment zone. Okay, so my opponent has a full 7 orders plus a lieutenant order. So they get to have a lot of fun this turn. They spend their first order, and they declare short movement skill on their parachutist. So they move forward into cover. I declare ballistic attack with my Alguacil because it's the only miniature that has line of sight to that target. And they declare BS attack and return. So the range is 16 inches. Obviously here's my opponent's stat line. Ballistic skill of 12, outside of range for their shotgun, and I'm in cover -3, so they need 9s or less to succeed. For me, I'm in within good range. It's 16, so it's on the line, so on the line is in. I get +3, -3 for cover, and because my opponent has mimetism, I also get -3. Additionally to that, so I have 8s or less to succeed. And here's a photo from my opponent's perspective. There's a paratrooper and there's my Alguacil. So we roll a die. I get 1 die in ARO. My opponent gets 2 dies because the shotgun has 2 shots at in hit mode, not blast mode. Well, it doesn't matter, even in hit or blast mode, they get 2 shots. They score a 14 and a 9. I score a 7. Now my opponent succeeds both shots. They get a 9, so it's actually a critical. Their 14 fails, but their 9's a hit, and it's landing exactly on the success value, which is 9, so that makes it a critical. So that means I have to take 2 armor saves. Now the damage of the boarding shotgun is looks like it's actually meant to be 14. Apologies, a bit of a typo. And they get +1 for skill, which is +1 damage, and so it actually becomes damage 15. So I take 2 armor saves because it's a critical at 15 or less. I roll a 7 and a 3, and as you can see, summed up the armor and cover, both successes are definitely below 15, and I take 2 wounds. So I no longer have my miniature there. The next order from my opponent, they choose Discover, and that's for the rocket that has the infiltration skill, and they choose to try and see and reveal my camo token. I choose to shoot back, and my opponent will shoot back as well. So they have a submachine gun. This is their stat line. So the SA stands for surprise attack because I'm shooting out of cover, out of camouflage. So my opponent gets -7 overall. And because I'm shooting, I reveal myself. So my opponent rolls 3 dice for the burst of the submachine gun. And I fire a template because I'm using my shotgun. And my Sombra has a light shotgun. So I'm using the blast mode. So with the blast mode, you put down a template, and it goes from the small end touches your miniature's base, and then you put the big end over where you want it to go. And obviously you can see it covers both those miniatures there, the infiltrating rocket and the camo token. So that means I don't have to actually roll for a hit and use the blast mode or using template weapons. It's an automatic hit. So this is the wonderful things about shotguns, is that you can use the blast mode and just have automatic hits. You don't have to roll for ballistic attribute. So the damage of my weapon for the light shotgun is 13. So sorry, my opponent fails all their ballistic skill shots, and they make 2 saves, one for each miniature, because they only get 1 blast template in ARO, and they both score above 13, so they succeed. Now, because they succeed, they have to take a guts roll, and my opponent chose to fail automatically, so they could move 2 inches and separate. And that way it's more dispersed then, so I cannot hit both at once. And my opponent realized it was a mistake to put them together, but now, she realized, yep, that was a bad move. I'll separate them so they can only be targeted once in ARO. Next order was to be spent on a camo token. They chose idle. I choose ballistic skill attack, and they chose ballistic skill attack back. And that was with my Sombra and my now revealed Intruder, because they could both see. And even though it's camo token here, because they declared BS attack, they reveal, so I get the option to shoot BS attack in both arrows. Technically, it would have been idle, hold, ballistic attack, and then next one ballistic attack. But I just tried to speed this up a bit. So this is the attributes for my Intruder, because I'm using the shotgun again from my Sombra. So my Intruder with a HMG has to actually take shots. It's only 1 shot. No modifications to range or cover. However, camouflage token is at -3. Now I don't get surprise attack, because surprise attack was against the Sombra, because this is a face-to-face roll, and this is an opportunistic roll, because my opponent wanted to take out my Sombra, so it was declared face-to-face there. And then once my opponent declared ballistic attack, I chose ballistic attack for my Intruder, so I get a normal roll, unopposed roll, and these two face off. So for my Intruder, I need to get 10 or less. And my opponent chooses to use a template for their shotgun, and I choose the same as well. So first off, we'll just do the normal roll. My Intruder rolls a 10, which is a critical. The damage of the HMG is 15. Opponent rolls 2 dice. As an armor save, 18 and 20. That's well above 15, so my opponent saves. Now my opponent reveals himself because they have to. And now we do the face-to-face. So we both use the blast template. We both have automatic hits. We pretty much just do the armor rolls. So the damage of my light shotgun is 13, and the boarding shotgun from my opponent is 14. So I need to get higher than 14, and my opponent needs to get higher than 13 to pass their armor saves. The dice roll for me, 8-5, from my opponent 5, so we're both well under. Looking at our armor, looks like I take 2 wounds and my opponent takes 1 wound. So my opponent goes unconscious for the SAS miniature, and mine is removed off the game table because I'm at the dead state. And that's from my opponent's perspective there. SAS firing at the Sombra, and obviously the Intruder here is firing at the SAS. Opponent's next order, which is on their other camo token here. And I choose to hold with my Intruder because I can see that, no one else can. They choose ballistic attack, and I choose ballistic attack. So now my opponent reveals himself as a Zenith 7, and then we have a face-to-face. So this is my opponent's ballistic data. As you can see, not quite as favourable thanks to my intruder's mimetism, and they have to get a 9 or less to succeed. However, because they were attacking from the camouflage state, I get -3 as well for the surprise attack, and my multispectral visor cancels their mimetism, so it's not as bad for me. I end up getting 10 or less, or have to get 10 or less to succeed. So we roll the dice, I get a 5, my opponent gets 1 and 16. So the 16 is a miss, the 1 is a hit. However, my 5 is higher than a 1, so it cancels that, so I get 1 hit against the opponent. So my opponent has to take an armor save against damage 15, roll a 9, plus their armor of 2 and cover of 3 equals 14, and 14 is less than 15, so my opponent takes a wound. And that's from my opponent's Zenith 7, looking at the intruder. Okay, they spend a short skill on their Volkolak heavy infantry. Decides to move up. I choose best attack from my intruder. And my opponent chooses ballistic skill attack back as well. Now the distance between my intruder and the Volkolak is 18 inches. That's my opponent's ballistic attack data. Obviously my mimetism helps me out here. And my opponent gets 4 dice on 9 or less to succeed. I get 1 dice on 13 or less. So I'm rolling on flats. Here's the picture here from my opponent's perspective, the Volkolak and my intruder. We roll the dice, I get a 3. My opponent gets 16, 11, 9 and 4. And this means these two, 11 and 16, are miss, the 9 and 4 are hits, and the 9 is a critical because the success value is 9. So I have to take 3 armor saves, because every time you have a critical, it forces the opponent to roll an extra armor save. The damage of the weapon is 15 for the HMG. I roll 3 dice, a 19, a 6 and a 4. So I know the 19 is automatically a success. However, I have to add up my armor and cover for the remaining dice, and I get 10 and 12 in total, and that's less than 15, so I take 2 wounds and remove my intruder from play because I'm in the dead state. As you can see, no more intruder. My opponent's next lot of orders is spent on Rocket, and they move up to the cover. I have no miniatures that can see that miniature, so I have no arrows, and they declare move again and move up the stairs. Declare their last order, and the heavy infantry moves down the stairs. Once again, no one can see my opponent, and they move the heavy infantry up there. So as you can see, what my opponent has done is set themselves up for a bit more of a favourable position. And my opponent spends the lieutenant, so I know who the lieutenant is, and they declare move, so it's this rocket here. I'm like, okay, I know what that is. Once again, no arrows, and they just declare an idle, so they want to keep their miniature there. Okay, my turn. I've only have 3 miniatures remaining, so I only get 3 orders for my order pool. However, I do have the Hellcat, and that's off the table, ready to jump into combat. So that's what I do. I plan to get back a bit of the initiative, so I declare combat jump and deploy my Hellcat right here. Not touching anything, however, no opponents can have line of fire to me, and so that's a very safe bet. So I have to roll a physical of 12, and because I get combat jump +3, I add 3 to my physical attribute, which is 15. So I need a 15 or less to succeed, and I do. I get 15, luckily, and it's a critical. Not that it means much anyway, it just means that I definitely stay there. If I were to fail that, I'd have to deploy within my deployment zone along the table edge. So I took a bit of a risk, and the risk paid off. because now I'm actually in a very good position this turn. Okay, so now that my Hellcat is on the table with the combat jump skill, I can now spend orders on my Hellcat to have an impact on the battlefield. And that's exactly what I do. I spend my first order, and I decide to move my Hellcat into cover. My opponent decides to shoot back, and I shoot back. Now my target is the heavy infantry. So I am using the hit mode of the shotgun, of the boarding shotgun, and it uses AP ammunition, so armor piercing ammunition. And this is the stats here, because I'm outside of 8 inches. It works out to be 9 inches in total between the Hellcat and the Volkolock. So I need a 9 or less. And my opponent, because it's in the bad range for the HMG, also needs a 9 or less. So here it is from my perspective. There's my Hellcat and there's heavy infantry. As you can see, I'm in a very good position to shoot at it. Obviously the camera is a bit off to the side and it looks like the heavy infantry is in the open. However, directly behind the miniature, that heavy infantry is actually obscured partially. So I roll 2 dice, I get an 8 and a 5, my opponent rolls a 13. So that means I have 2 successes, 2 hits. Now it's damage 14 for the boarding shotgun, and I'm using AP ammunition, so my opponent has to halve their armor save. So my opponent rolls 2 and 3. Now the heavy infantry's armor is 4, but because I'm using AP ammunition, you halve it. And the rule is for AP ammunition or other types of ammunition, it's you halve down and then roll up 1. So for instance, if the armor was 3 and not 4, half of 3 is 1.5, and then you move up to 2, so they would only have to have an armor save of 2, not 3. However, for 4, half of that is 2, it's an even number, you can't have partial numbers in rolls, so it remains armor save of 2. And as you can see, adding up the armor and cover saves gives a final total of 7 and 8 respectively, which is significantly less than 14, and so my opponent takes 2 wounds, which puts them in the dead state and is removed from play. So I managed to deal with that threat, and I'm very happy with that. And my next plan is my next order, is on my evader, because I plan to push them up and get ready to assault the center console. So I'll move them up to there. Obviously that whole movement, because you've got to measure the actual range of movement, takes 4 inches, down, across and up. Opponent has no line of fire to my miniature, and I'll move again. Next order, same deal. I'll move my evader closer. Again, no enemy line of fire to my active miniature. And I'll move up in base contact with the building, ready for next turn. Okay, my opponent now has only 4 orders on the battlefield. Their first order is spent on the rocket, and it moves up here to hold that objective. And I decide to dodge with my Hellcat because I want to get an extra move 2 inches around here to try and chase up. I can't climb up because it's greater than 2 inches, so I want to try and run around and maybe come in from behind. So I choose dodge for my Hellcat. My opponent chooses move, and they choose to go prone. So I need to roll 12 or less to succeed, and I get a 19, so I fail, so my Hellcat just stays there. Now my opponent spends their order on the Paracommando, and it moves up. I have no line of sight to the active miniature, and my opponent puts it behind the building there. And they declare the next order on the same Paracommando. They go up the stairs. I choose ballistic attack, and so does my opponent, because I can see them coming up the stairs, and I choose to shoot here, and my opponent chooses to shoot from there as well. And because we both have shotguns, we choose to use the templates and shoot each other in the face. As you can see, I'm covering that, and the same is for my opponent. However, they get +1 because they're skilled, so they're 15. This is now the corrected information, not from the first time it was used. Apologies. And my light shotgun is damage 13. As you can see, this is just for dramatic effect. Here's the path of the movement for the miniature, and as you can see, just there, my silhouette is visible enough to be targetable. Okay, so my opponent gets burst 2 for the template, and I get burst 1, so I roll 2 dice for my armor save, and my opponent rolls 1. They get a 14, I get a 15 and a 3. So as you can see, summing up the armor and cover, I get 20 and 8. So one armor save is a success, the other is a failure, so I take 1 wound. And obviously my opponent got 14, so it's higher than 13, so they just succeed. And they choose to do a guts roll, so they can move a further 2 inches. Okay, so they were down here, the guts roll brought them up to here 2 inches, so they could claim and have more troops on the tabletop. And I've just taken a wound for my Hellcat. First order, I spend on the Aguasil to move up in position. And I get a ballistic skill arrow attack from my opponent's Paracommando. And I choose to shoot back. So they use the template, and I'm definitely within template range. And I'm definitely within weapons range, which is 5 inches. Yes, you wouldn't think that'd be 5 inches there, but it is. So here's the stats for my data. I'm rolling on flat 11s. I get 3 dice, a 17, 10, and a 6. So I get 2 successes, which means 2 hits. But I also take an automatic hit from my opponent's shotgun. There's a nice little photo of my Aguasil shooting at the Paracommando. The respective damage of our weapons. I get a 7, my opponent rolls 18 and 6. So I get in total 11, which is less than 15, so I die, or I go unconscious. And my opponent, 1 roll is a success, the other is a fail, and so they take 1 wound. So as you can see, 1 wound each, both unconscious. I spend my next order, and I choose to use my climbing plus skill on my evader, which means that my climb skill is no longer an entire order skill, it is a short movement skill. So I can basically climb up and then engage the enemy in here. So that's what I do. Climb up the side of the building, and my opponent shoots back, and I love to shoot back. So I'm using my AP Spitfire because I get 4 dice. I was thinking about using my pistol, but I only get 2 shots, and I plan on split my shots on each miniature. And I thought if I use my AP Spitfire, I get 4 dice, and I can put more dice on one and less on the other. So I need to get 13 or less to hit. And my opponent, with their infiltrating rocket here, uses their submachine gun. So this is their stat line, they get plus 13. And this one here uses their light shotgun, so the template right there. As you can see from my perspective, that's the one with the shotgun, that's the infiltrating rocket, that's the one taking the 1 shot using their AP submachine gun, and this I'm getting 1 shot, 1 blast back from the light shotgun. So I allocate my rolls. 2, 10, and 15 are aimed at this rocket with a shotgun, and my 13 is aimed at the infiltrating rocket with a submachine gun. Now I've already allocated this before the rolls. You can't just roll the dice and say, yep, those are on this one, those are on. You have to roll, choose which one you pick before you roll. And my opponent with a submachine gun rolls on a 5. So my critical, so this is basically a normal roll, and this is a face-to-face roll. And my 13 is a critical and cancels that, and means that this miniature has to take 2 armor saves, 2 successes here, and this miniature has to take 2 armor saves as well. So there's the respective damages of the weapons. Mine's 14 for the Spitfire, 13 for the submachine gun and shotgun. Now this 19 and 19 is the armor save for the rocket with shotgun, and the 1 and the 19 is the armor save for the infiltration rocket, and mine is just a save of 2. So as you can see, I fail and I take a wound. The rocket with the shotgun survives because it's greater than 14. However, the opponent's infiltrating rocket, obviously 1 is a fail, and they have an armor of 1, which gives them a save of 2, so they take 1 wound. As you can see, 1 wound here and 1 wound for that miniature, so we're both unconscious. So lucky for this little miniature. I spend another order, move again, and I'll move my remaining Aguacil up here. Obviously no one can see me because this miniature is prone, so they can't see up the little bits of cover on the building. And I choose to move up again, and I move up there unmolested. Now I'll spend my lieutenant order because this is actually my lieutenant miniature, and I choose to move up and get into cover and go prone. So that's what I do. I'm up here in cover, proning, ready to deal with my last turn. Okay, now my opponent has a lot of tactical thinking to do. So they move the lieutenant up. Now because my remaining miniature is in cover, I've no line of fire, I cannot do anything, and so my opponent can just move the lieutenant up unmolested. And same again, all the way up into cover, and they stay there. And that's the end of my opponent's turn. They're happy with it. My turn, it's turn 6, the final turn for the game, and I'm taking a bit of a gambit here, but it eventually pays off. So I declare move, and I decide to stand up. My opponent's lieutenant, this is a lieutenant and lieutenant face-off, LT versus LT, and I'll just shoot back as well. So they use their shotgun because they unfortunately have a shotgun as well as a rifle, and my opponent chooses to use the blast template. However, I have to shoot. I get 3 dice. I roll on flat 11s because I'm in good range, but the cover negates my good range, so it's just flat 11s. And I roll a 14, a 12, and a 16. Now, 4 is the only success I have. So it's one hit. And it's basically 1 hit versus 1 hit. I get an automatic hit from my opponent's shotgun, they get 1 hit from me. Damage of the weapon is the same, 13. I roll a 10, my opponent rolls a 4. And the armor save, and I get 14, so it's greater than 13, so my miniature's alive. And my opponent scores an 8 in total, so their miniature takes a wound and goes unconscious. Hallelujah. Now, I'm taking a risk. My opponent has 1 remaining alive miniature that's scoring points, and I was unaware of how much the points were at the start of the game, and I did take a risk and thought, well, maybe my miniature is more expensive than theirs, so I decided to spend my lieutenant order. First of all, I roll a guts roll because I want to stay there, and it's 13. I get 11, so I succeed, which is good because I plan on jumping 2 and hopefully trying to have more points in the objective than my opponent. So as you can see, I spend my lieutenant order. I declare entire order skill jump, and it's 3 inches from edge to edge. So I need to have enough room for my miniature to land on the other side. So for a 4-inch movement miniature, you pretty much can only jump 1, 2, 3 inches max. You can't jump 4 because obviously you'll come up short. Obviously no one's left. Well, the only ones left is prone, so they cannot see me because I cannot see the base of the miniature from there. And so I jump onto the platform, hoping to win the game. So that's the end of the game. That's the remaining miniature there, the one that had the shotgun. That's my opponent's lieutenant, and that's my lieutenant. Just jumped in, pushed him out the way, and claimed, landed on here. So at the end of the game, we added up the points for our miniatures. Turns out my lieutenant is only worth 10 points, and my opponent's simple rocket is worth 11. So as you can see, 11 is higher than 10, and my opponent won that game by 1 point. Okay, so the mechanics demonstrated: Parachutist and Combat Jump. As you can see, my opponent chose to deploy the Parachutist during the deployment phase in the midfield, which ended up being quite successful, and I ended up deploying my Hellcat in the Combat Jump, which helped take out at least one unit, one enemy trooper, and help me gain some sort of initiative. Okay, so that's the end of tutorial 5, and that is the end of the Crimson Stone tutorial series. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you got something out of it. Please, if you have any questions or comments, put them in the questions. Put them in the comments below. And if you have any feedback for the videos, please let me know. I'd like to try and improve my skill level if possible. So thank you for watching, and take care. And I hope you know how to play Infinity a little bit more confidently than before. All right, see you guys.